Muted.
Welcome to the NACHC P&I Day on the Hill press call. We're very much looking forward to meeting with you in a couple weeks. But before we get started, you'll see on your screen just a few housekeeping items. You'll be muted for the presentation, but if you have questions as we're kind of walking through things, feel free to use the chat box. We will provide probably 20 minutes or so at the end to talk through questions as well, and we'll unmute you at that point, so you'll be able to speak up. If you're having audio trouble, we suggest that you log off or hang up and restart, or chat us, and we can try to logistically help you with that. And then lastly, we will be recording this webinar for folks who aren't able to attend, so just make note of that. All right. So my name is Carly Hood. I am the policy associate who will be joining you at Day on the Hill in DC. In the room we have Laura Etherton as well and Rivkala Brodsky, our policy team, and together we're going to kind of walk through some goals for our Day on the Hill. So today we'll discuss our goals and agenda for Day on the Hill. We'll spend quite a bit of time focusing on the key issues that we want to discuss with members of Congress. We'll prep you with some items that we're asking you to prepare and bring with you, and then I'll touch on some brief logistics that are still in flux, but we want to just keep them on your radar, and then again we'll provide about 20 minutes for question and answer at the end. So our goals for the day on the Hill are to first educate members of Congress on the vital importance of Medicaid. Obviously that's in the front of a lot of folks' mind right now, and we'll want to really be able to discuss the importance of Medicaid and the pillars that fund Medicaid programs. We'll discuss what's at risk with the upcoming primary care funding cliff, and also primary care workforce issues. So those are kind of the three big buckets that we'll be helping to educate members of Congress on. We also want to share the impact of the community health centers across Oregon and what they provide for the people in our state. And then lastly, a key goal is to connect with policymakers to really strengthen the relationship and thank them for supporting CHCs in Oregon. So an agenda, again, some of this is likely to change, but we wanted to share as much as we know at this point. Wednesday evening, March 29th, there will be an Oregon delegation. We're kind of working on the time right now and the location and making sure we have enough space for the great group of people that will be out there. We have a lot of interest and a lot of folks attending, so we may need to move that room. But that will be a chance for us to connect, kind of walk through the different meetings that we'll be having the following day, practice the talking points and the stories that we're asking folks to tell, and really make sure that everyone feels comfortable with how Thursday, Day on the Hill, will go. Then Thursday, we will plan to meet at this point at 9 a.m. That Wednesday night we'll be able to kind of confirm where we're going to meet in the morning, but we'll meet at 9, travel to the Capitol, and then we have the following meetings set up already with Congress folks. So we'll meet with Senator Ron Wyden. I this morning sent out the list of attendees, so we'll all be in attendance at that meeting. At 11:15 to 11:30 we have 15 minutes with Congresswoman Bonamici, and we've divided half of the neighborhood health team because there are a couple of meetings for those particular, for Congresswoman Bonamici and Congressman Schrader's districts. So we'll ask that half of that team go to one meeting and half go to the other so we can hit both Congress folks. 11:30 to 11:45 we'll meet with Congressman Schrader. Noon to 12:30 we'll meet with Senator Merkley, and again that's all of us. 1 to 1:15 we have time with Congressman Blumenauer. And then from 3 to 3:30 we currently have a meeting with a staffer for Congressman Walden. We're hoping to try to pull him in for a few minutes, but that has yet to be seen if we'll be able to get that scheduled.
And then just noting, La Clinica would be in there too.
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it got cut off.
Great. And this will be up to date with names and clinics, so you'll be confident, where you're meant to go the night before. And then from 5 to 6, we have a meeting with Tanya Bowers, who's the acting administrator for BPHC. So that location is to be determined, but I know Laura sent out an email last week asking folks to generate questions that they might have, and we can hopefully get those addressed at that time. And then we'll wrap up the day with a happy hour and dinner close to the Capitol and the hotels, just to kind of celebrate the day and all of the successful stories that we share. All right.
Great. Okay, so this is Laura Etherton. So excited about everyone going to DC. The timing could not be more critical, but it is definitely creating some challenges for us as we prepare for the day, because things are changing so rapidly in Congress. We want to both be nimble but also be prepared. So this is our attempt to do that, and we're working closely with folks at NAC and others to make sure our talking points are really relevant and productive. So overall, I think context is the overarching, issue as we go into this will be what's been being called, the repeal and replace legislation. It's called the American Health Care Act, and it goes far beyond the Affordable Care Act to include really a profound reshaping of the Medicaid program overall. And so that, I think, it will be an overarching issue. But we know that we're going to want to talk about the health center funding cliff and also workforce programs like the National Health Service Corps and teaching health centers as well, because those are all really vital and also in peril. So talking points overall, our main pieces are really just saying we are community health centers, reminding people what community health centers do and how vital we are to the Medicaid program. In how big health centers are in Oregon and how vital to serving people. The second piece is really, please do not put patient coverage at risk as part of the American Health Care Act. So some of the most important pieces we will be emphasizing with lawmakers is that Oregon patients are, in Oregon, 60% of health center patients are covered by Medicaid, or the Oregon Health Plan in Oregon, and that is an absolutely critical piece to the survival of health centers. And the importance of fixing the health center funding cliff, because dramatic reshaping of Medicaid combined with a funding cliff is just an incredibly severe impact on health centers. So those two pieces are kind of the next, those two components there. I think the thing that is working really well on the Hill, and I just got off the phone this morning with the team in DC, the thing that is having the most impact, both to provide folks who, in Congress, people are on pretty firm sides on these issues, the thing that's helping the most to help guide people's understanding of the issues and their effectiveness at making positive changes in the bill, or to understand the impact in their community. So the most important thing that we can bring are really the stories that illustrate how important Medicaid is for our patients, what that's been able to do, and what the impact could be if there were significant cuts to Medicaid plus the health center funding cliff. So just overall, those are the pieces that we don't have to be nimble on, because we know that those stories and examples not only will continue to be valid, they're also true and really effective. So yes, we've got the, protecting Medicaid, please act to avoid the upcoming health center funding cliff. So just wanting to point out here, these are two totally different issues. There's the, repeal and replace American Health Care Act. The American Health Care Act doesn't do anything to fix the funding cliff, but we will need Congress to take proactive action separately to fix that funding cliff situation. Main points there are that the funding for the health center program is foundational to primary care. Health centers face, a 70% funding cut to that base grant, to the 330 funds, if the funding cliff is not averted. And then we have some actually very specific asks right now that we do know of, which is supporting the appropriations for health centers by signing on to a Dear Colleague letter that's happening in Congress. So there's a very specific thing that we hope that we can get all of the delegation behind, and then pushing them to work together to make sure they fix that funding cliff by the end. And then finally, supporting health center workforce programs. The National Health Service Corps and the Teaching Health Centers programs, funding for both of those has also the same deadline as our funding cliff. So by the end of September 30th, that's what the funding is guaranteed through. And so we're hoping that the health center workforce programs and fixing the funding cliff all get wrapped together in a big thing, together also with the CHIP program. Very critical to get those wrapped together and fix all of those, really important. So those are the big pieces that I had for key talking points and key issues. And I think the thing that I want to emphasize is that this is what we have right now. As we get closer to the actual day, so we've got 2 weeks and 1 day until this, and that's a lifetime in DC politics right now. 2 weeks is huge. So we could be doing everything from advocating for specific amendments that will protect patients to change things. It could be just sharing those stories to encourage them to make changes in the bill. It could be a lot of different pieces, depending on what the content of the language is and depending on where it is in the process. So usually when we do these prep calls, we know exactly what we're asking for. That's certainly true of the funding cliff and workforce. But when it comes to protecting Medicaid, I think we want to be sure that we're really nimble and have a really tight, clear message when we get there. And so asking for some flexibility on that as we move forward, and also acknowledging the messages are going to be a little different depending on who we're meeting with and what committee they're on. So meeting with Congresswoman Bonamici, for example, is going to be pretty different than meeting with Congressman Walden, given their perspectives on the issues, the committees they're on, and what kind of difference we're asking them to make on the issue. So some overall context. That is what I have for me, and then I think we're going to talk about what to prepare, what we'll have, and what to prepare.
Great, thanks, Laura. So what NAC has prepared and what we have prepared and will bring with us to make sure we're all ready. We'll have a day of agenda, including kind of the division of names and clinics for folks, so you know who you're meeting with and when. We'll have a participant contact sheet, including names and information of the folks who will be there. NAC has put together 3 policy papers on the kind of those 3 buckets that Laura just mentioned. And so those will be prepared in there. Those will be good to read through and kind of understand at a national level what our messaging is. We'll have packets for each legislator, including a newly created Oregon Community Health Center fact sheet. Talking points, so based on what we know in a couple of weeks, we'll have it kind of printed out and ready for you so you feel comfortable with it in front of you. And then our federal policy priorities will be there as well. And then we'll have some forms, note-taking kind of logistic forms for you to track next steps if you need them. What we're asking you to prepare in advance are largely stories, as Laura mentioned. Examples of what cuts to Medicaid and the funding cliff would mean for your patients and your community health center, in addition to how you've seen expanded coverage or health center funding positively impact patients and the services that you're able to provide. So again, on Wednesday night, we'll have time to kind of walk through these stories together and practice telling them so that you feel comfortable. But I think in advance of getting there, isolating specific examples and patient stories that really can help advocate for both Medicaid, this health center funding, and then workforce will be important. We're also asking that folks complete the funding cliff estimator and Medicaid impact tool that NAC has put together. So there's a link. We'll have these slides in a webinar, and we'll send them out as well. But there's a link here that leads you to those estimators, and those are really concrete numbers that we can share with Congress people to share the impact of the funding cliff and Medicaid on your health center specifically. And then data that it might be helpful for you to have in advance are, the number of patients, your clinic locations, any patient demographics, really focused on kind of breakdown of insurance status, poverty level, what your patient panels look like, the number of staff that you employ, and again, some of those stories and examples of how your health center is improving care and outcomes. So at this point, again, logistically, our Oregon delegation meeting is scheduled for late afternoon, early evening. We'll follow up with an exact location and time for that, but we really encourage you all to be there. That's the best time for us to kind of practice what the day is going to look like. At that point, we'll also decide what time to meet and where to meet in the morning. Should be right around 9. Lunch will likely be on our own day of when we're up at the Hill, and that's, we love to have lunch together, but that's really due to the fact that we will have a lot of meetings kind of spread out throughout the day. We couldn't clump them in the morning or afternoon this particular year. Prepare questions for the meeting with Tanya Bowers, and then again, that time to celebrate together after. So next steps, just collect those stories, complete the funding cliff and Medicaid impact estimators. Please let us know if you have questions on where to find those. We're happy to direct you to those. And then if any scheduling changes have happened, if you need to cancel registration, or if additional folks have said, hey, I really want to go out to DC, please let us know by the end of next week so we can be sure to follow up with staffers and Congress people who are expecting to meet with you. All right, at this point, we will open it up for questions. So we're going to unmute you. Don't all speak at once, but please do pipe in if you have any questions.
Hi, this is Gil Virginia Garcia. I was wondering, is there any identified bill to attach the health center funding cliff and National Health Service Corps and CHIP to? Anything that we should be targeting there?
We don't have that at this point. So it could end up being this American Health Care Act, which may or may not pass, and we might feel that it, on balance, would be better if it didn't. So that might be one vehicle, but it doesn't have it in there now, and I think we'd be surprised if it did. And then, other than that, it may be that they are
being attached to that.
I think about mandatory funding. And so we will be certainly advocating for the portion of the health center grants that are in appropriations. That's the other 30% is in appropriations, and that's what that dear colleague letter is on, is fully funding health centers in that appropriations piece. Whether or not that is the vehicle to do the mandatory funding, I don't think it can be, but that's a good question, and we can find out for sure. But I think the idea is that it will probably be a different piece.
Laura, this is John Duke. Is there going to be any relevance for us to talk about things like the opiate crisis in the nation, or mental health funding in the nation, or should we just stay more closely to these talking points?
That's a really good question. I think the answer is sort of yes and no. So I think given how brief a time we have with lawmakers and how just very intense it is right now. In terms of our main asks, will really be about protecting Medicaid and averting the funding cliff and the workforce programs. That said, I think the work for, I think mental health and the opioid epidemic are two excellent reasons why they need to protect Medicaid and fix the funding cliff, because health centers can be working on those very things. So if, for example, the American Health Care Act went forward as it is right now, there'd be a lot less funding to provide mental health and substance use disorder treatment to people on Medicaid. And that's a really, telling the stories of how impactful that is and how vital those programs are to delivering that care, I think can be really important. And I think for folks who are in Congressman Walden's district, we know that he cares a lot both about the opioid epidemic and then also about mental health. And so those are really good areas to emphasize the importance of them. And then probably one of the most important things lawmakers could do on those issues is protect Medicaid and fix the funding cliff.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. That's a really, really good point.
This is Dave. I think at a meeting the other day, Gil brought up immigration as well, and I fear thinning the soup, if you will, on the message, but it's another area of great concern, and it's really not health centers, right? Only it's, I know in our area we have such a large immigrant population, and especially Hispanic, and the fear in the community is palpable.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'll ask the question, is there a role to advocate? Or is
yeah,
this a
I think,
place?
Laura, this is Gil at VG, and we met just recently with Congresswoman Bonamici, and she was talking about introducing some legislation that would essentially make law the sensitive locations policy in immigration. So that might be, with meetings with her anyway, support in that effort. She didn't really seem too optimistic about it going anywhere, but at least it having some debate and discussion about it and the impact that the executive order is having, on the health and well-being in the community. It's a good way to forward that issue.
yeah, I think Dave and Gil, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. There's folks for whom in the delegation for whom touching base on this issue and sharing the challenges that patients are facing and the fear is appropriate, and especially for folks who are working on the issue and who certainly there's other members for whom this is a more difficult issue politically, and it won't necessarily build that relationship, nor will they really have the ability to impact the policy. And so, I guess my overall gut is generally where meetings are impactful, where they really make a difference, is when they are about just a few topics. Ideally, one. That's my favorite meeting, is to have one thing and you actually get somewhere on it and you get a commitment. And so already we have 3, and so I think it's challenging, and they're all so important and intertwined that there's no way you could untangle them. So it's always it's like the point of an arrow. The closer that can be, the further it can go, the tighter that is. That said, these are incredibly real issues, and I think there's some in the delegation who expressing appreciation for their attention to the issue would be appropriate. And then there's certainly Congressman Walden appears to be in a really different place, and that's not at all the purview of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's not it's just not in that. They won't be able to do anything, and it would actually be a sort of an alienating it wouldn't be a relationship builder. It could derail the whole thing. So I think it's not an issue that, you know, in terms of policy, you know, health centers certainly aren't the sort of experts on the immigration policy, but the impact that it's having on communities is really real. So my gut would be let's stick with the main points, but be conscious of who might be doing some things that are special and allowing those connections to be made.
Hey, this is Ron in Lane County. I had a conversation with Dan Baker, our project officer, yesterday on something we're working on, a change of scope. He was not aware of the Region 10 meeting, and I would hope that our project officer could be there.
Oh, let's see. So the Region 10 meeting is for, you know, PCAs and health center leaders, specifically with the head of the Bureau of Primary Health Care. So there are a lot of different project officers within the different pieces, and there may be, so it's with the acting director of the Bureau, and then some of her executive team. As opposed, and then there's a lot of other folks there. That said, there may be project officers at P&I. And it can be a really nice time to grab a cup of coffee, say hello, do those different pieces. Yeah, but the specific meeting with Region 10 is something that the Northwest Regional Primary Care Association steps up, and it's a pretty high level meeting.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Also, it's a space where you can kind of complain about your project officer if you would like to their bosses. But you know, we try to do that very, very politely.
Hey Laura, in the House proposal, there's a defunding of Planned Parenthood and some sort of thought that funding might go to health centers. Has NAC put out any kind of a statement or policy guidance for us around that issue?
I think they are still in the process of coming up with that piece. That's a really good question, and I think we're expecting some kind of like it's not so much an issue we need to bring up, but it's more of if it comes up sort of in an FAQ kind of style. I think the basic thing on that piece is certainly that given the fact that health centers are facing, you know, a proposed bill to completely reshape the Medicaid program that could make 14 million people lose Medicaid coverage, and a funding cliff that could cut 70% of the federal grant funding for health centers, we can't even begin to contemplate taking on the patients that, you know, would need additional patients that would need more care if a whole set of providers like Planned Parenthood were taken out of the system. So I think it's sort of a, you know, acknowledge and pivot immediately to, you know, look what we can't even imagine doing that. Yeah, but we're definitely not in a position of thanking them for taking away most of the funding and then giving a little bit back. That's not, yeah, not so helpful. But yeah, I think having a pretty precise response to that question will be really important.
Yeah, Laura, I agree. It's not something we necessarily bring up, but I know at least in our conversation with Bonamici, it did come up, and she was interested in what our thoughts are on that, and we essentially said what advised there, and because I think that, you know, they're thinking how do they respond, you know, and a lot of what we're doing is I think helping provide some talking points, some fuel to, most of our delegation, which is opposed to the current legislation and supportive of health centers.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's right, and we're actually working on a letter on that issue to kind of be careful about clarifying that issue. One thing I think we want to we just want to make sure that the language is precise so that it doesn't give the impression that health centers don't have any capacity to grow or take on new patients that could be taken out of context in a completely different conversation. And so we just want to make sure it's really precise, but that's a good point, and that we should be prepared for it to come up and to have a quick way to address it, and we can share some language on that as well. Great. Yeah, other questions or comments?
Dave, just because I still work in a paper world half the time, and I don't know if this is on the list or not, but for those that are going, kind of a list of who's there, and I see Laura and Carly's phone numbers and stuff here, which is great, but it would be nice to have a list of who's there in our cell phones or something, so that we could get a hold of each other, and if, we get separated at lunch, or you get lost, or, you want to talk to somebody about something, that would be handy.
Yep, you are correct. That is on our checklist of things to prepare, so we'll have that ready for you.
Okay. And then the other thing is, do you want us to send you, so like I have, it's a one paper, two-sided, with 5 stories that we've pulled together. Patient voices and true stories from the Columbia River Gorge. Do you want to see that in advance?
That would be great. Yeah, if you want to send that to me, this is Carly. If you want to send that to me, I can look it over, and we can kind of talk through which ones might be most effective to share.
All right, that would be great. I would appreciate that. I'll get that to you next day or two.
That's great. And just a reminder of stories, of course, we always want to make sure that patients are okay with us sharing their stories, even if we've changed their names. It is their story after all, and sometimes they might, you might be surprised that they don't want it shared even if you change their name. And then the other piece is that sharing stories, I think, to the extent that you can, make sure they're okay with it getting shared publicly. And then if you can send those, if everyone has, if you have written up stories, if you have, a couple of little blurbs that you can send to Carly, that would be great. We're definitely amassing those in sort of a story bank collection. And then also, having a story is a really good way to sort of spur people to think. Other health centers can sort of spur the thinking on, okay, that's a great example of a story. I can think of something similar or something on a slightly different theme. So it really helps to have examples to generate even more stories. And then one last point, we've focused generally on stories that are both hopeful, like here's what we've been able to do, here's what's really at risk of losing coverage for people who've recently gained it through Medicaid expansion, were a lot of the original stories, but certainly stories around, basic Medicaid and how just important Medicaid, underlying Medicaid is before expansion is critical. And then the last thing I want to mention is, because of the way, at least right now, this could change, but right now the American Health Care Act has it so that it takes a while to repeal the Medicaid expansion for new people, allows people to stay on, but it takes Medicaid expansion away from people if they don't qualify, if they fall off Medicaid, if they churn off for at least 30 days, which is incredibly common. So I think stories that talk about people who kind of cycle in and out of Medicaid because maybe they get a job that makes it so they don't qualify for expanded Medicaid anymore, and then, you know, a year or so later that maybe they lose that job, and there's a period where they, you know, they're going back and forth, in and out. And in the American Health Care Act, it would mean that they'd be out and they wouldn't be able to get back in. And so that continuity of coverage, that continuity of care, and the challenges that we see when people don't have that kind of continuity, I think those stories can also be really impactful in this exact piece. And it's some of those details of how this will really impact people that lawmakers haven't necessarily really thought through and can really be helpful. And the final thing I want to note is that when you look on the agenda in the meetings, I think right now we are still working out a specific time for the DeFazio meeting, but we are absolutely planning on having one, and I think their office is, we're just trying to figure out when it will be and how to get it so that it doesn't conflict with people who would need to be in that meeting and another meeting at the same time. But just noting that that one will get added as we get it.
Do you guys know, is there any, how can I say this? We're not being recorded, right?
Yes.
Yes,
We are being recorded? Yeah. Is this maybe a conversation, Dave, that you and I have offline?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, good. Super.
Thank you guys very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. We're looking forward to, well, I'm looking forward to meeting you all. We're looking forward to seeing you in DC, though.
Yeah. It's highly likely that that prep meeting on the Wednesday night will end up being later in the evening. So it will likely change to 6:45, and we're trying to get a bigger room because there's so many of us. So just want to flag that. But we'll probably send out a calendar invite with East Coast time on that one once we have it, just because that's a little in flux right now. It's kind of a good problem to have, that you have to find a new room because you're so big. Oh, sorry.
The slide deck that you guys flashed through for us, I didn't see that on the email invite, and I wanted to look back at some of those points you made. How can we do that?
So the slides will be shared. In addition to the fact that this is recorded, we can share the webinar as well. So
Okay.
Are you referencing some of the slides from today?
Yeah, just from today.
Yep, we'll share those with you.
All right. All right.
Great.
Oh, have a good
I cannot
day.
imagine a better time. Super. All right. So I think we're at the end of the agenda. Thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions or thoughts between now and then, please don't hesitate to send an email to me, Laura, or Carly. And we're really looking forward to seeing you and appreciate your being flexible and nimble on exactly what our messaging will be, you know, in the eons that go between now and 2 weeks from now. And looking forward to having a big impact with Oregon's delegation with you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Al.
Thank you.
Great, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.